that is what Sydney Banks was trying to point to. In one of his books, he states that we are terribly confused about what thinking is, and that it would seem like thinking is regurgitating information, and again and again and again, going over what we already know. And he says that's not thinking. Thinking is the ability of being empty so that new thought can come in, so that new insight can happen. And it's counterintuitive to see that that is what can take us to our best possibility. Because in our society, we value knowledge so much. What we know gives us tremendous status. And the more you know, the more status you have, the more respected you are. And so, of course, what do you mean emptying yourself of knowledge? That doesn't make any sense. I don't want to give this up. Oh, but it is in there. It is in that. And giving what you have up, that you get to cleanse, that you get to empty. And then you get to listen. You get to see something new. The word conversation means from versing one liquid into a recipient. But it requires emptiness. You see? You cannot pour something into something that is not empty. And so conversation requires that we empty ourselves again and again and again, just so that we can see something else. And the nature of life is conversational. We are in constant conversation with everything, with each other, with ourselves, with nature, with pots and pans, and as we cook, and with everything. We are in constant conversation. But we have forgotten the art of emptying ourselves. And again, it's so simple.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Brand New Thought. And this time we travel to Mexico to meet the wonderful Marina Galan. Marina is a coach, counselor, working with individuals, groups, and organizations. She shares the understanding of the three principles, which a lot of our listeners are already familiar with. That's one of the overarching topics of this podcast. And Marina has been a huge source of inspiration for me. Not only does she share the three principles, but she shares it with grace, it's hard for me to find the right words, but so many times I've paused after listening to your talks or webinars, and just with a sigh of relief or a laughter that comes after an insight. And both me and a lot of people very close to me admire Marina for what she shares and how she shares. So I'm kind of excited to have her on Brand New Thought. Marina, warm welcome to Brand New Thought.
Thank you so much, Razmik. Thank you so much for having me. I'm feeling rather inspired as well, being here. So thank you.
That's beautiful. Thank you for that. Well, listening to you speak about topics such as wellness, personal development, consciousness, it's almost obvious to me that you've spent a lot of time either contemplating or studying things like psychology, theosophy, philosophy. So tell us a little bit about your journey before you discovered the three principles.
The story. So I, like most people, had some challenges during my childhood. And so I started searching very early on for something that would help me cope, for something that would help me make sense of things and help me integrate them in a healthy way somehow. And so, yes, I think, I'm not absolutely sure, but I must have been probably 14 or 15 when I started devouring philosophy. And I started with the dark philosophy. So Albert Camus and all the existentialists, and heavy stuff. And from there on, oh my God, I have studied everything: philosophy, psychology, religion, compared religion, mysticism, Sufism, meditation, pranayama, all sorts of things, all sorts of things. And to be honest, all of them helped one way or another. And even though they helped, there was always that sense of, well, let's find something else
Mm.
that works. You know, it was like a collection of possibilities. And when I came upon the principles, honestly, it sounded way too simple compared to everything else. It sounded way too simple and way too obvious at the same time. So I was like, well, yeah, everybody knows this already. So what? But what really struck me was that the simplicity was trying to point to something that was already there, and that there was no need to find anything else. And that was very, very alluring, very tempting. So it was like, really? Really? Is this the end of the search? And it's funny because when I think of the search, and I am using the words hoping to find something that would help me cope, something that would help me deal with how things were. I realized that what we were looking for, what I was looking for, was a feeling of peace, was a feeling of well-being, and that, in the understanding of the three principles, is crystal clear. What you are looking for is a feeling, and from that certainty, from that level of clarity, how are you going to find a feeling in a philosophy? How are you going to find a feeling in a point of view that doesn't make sense? And so I remember someone asking me about the story. How did the search begin a few years ago? And I remember my mind did exactly what it did today with you, right? Yes, well, difficult childhood, this, that. But I remember saying, well, that's too obvious. What else is there behind it? And the image that was evoked in my mind was an image of myself hiding in an area on the roof of my house when I was little. And from that space, I could see a strip of sky. And I remembered what it felt like to be hiding there, looking at that strip of sky, and how the feeling can only be described as everything is fine. Everything is okay. And so that really rounded the whole thing for me, because it made me realize that, yes, what we are looking for is a feeling, and there is no way we can find it out there in a rational explanation of how reality. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So the invitation to really turn your gaze inside and find the feeling first, and then let that feeling guide you in whatever you do in life, is a 180 degrees turn from anything I had ever found before. Does that answer your question, Razmik?
Ooh, it definitely answers my question. It already gives me goosebumps. I mean, I knew it was coming, but I didn't know it was going to be so direct after the first question. Well, but was it a sudden thing, or, I mean, when did you realize that it was not just like a momentary high that you experienced, and there was something more profound here that you could consider dedicating your life to? Was that a sudden thing, or did it unfold over time?
No, it unfolded over time. It was not sudden. Um, it's it's interesting to consider that I was pretty much forced to study the principles by my ex-husband.
Very interesting. Okay, tell us more.
It is, isn't it? Yeah, he had been studying the principles, and he really wanted me. You know how sometimes when we find something that is working for us, we really want to push it down people's throats.
I've
Well,
done that.
that was my throat. That was I was having the principles pushed down onto, and so of course there was resistance as well. It felt too pushy, too necessary. And so my approach was very slow, very cautious, very yes, but, right? So full of psychological barriers. But at the same time, I guess the curiosity I had been living with forever of finding something allowed me to listen beyond that resistance and recognize something down under everything hiding, and that something was too good to not inquire more, to not follow it deeper. And so very, very slowly, the recognition that the information is in the feeling and that everything is already here, already complete. And all we are doing is just a big remembering. Again and again and again, because we forget and we remember and we forget and we remember. That allowed me a deeper level of peace that I had never imagined possible. And from that level of peace, everything I had wanted to find a way to cope with suddenly started magically almost taking its place. And so it was not through making those things take their place that I was to find peace, but it was in the opposite direction. It was the more time I spent in that deep feeling of peace, the more the memories, the thoughts found their way, found their place in the kaleidoscope that is me, I guess would be the way to say it, right? Does that make sense?
It does. It's very beautiful. I relate to that. I mean, you pointed to a lot of things. I relate to almost all of it. It's funny, isn't it? When we seek whatever modality we might use, whether it's therapy, I don't know, coaching, this technique and that technique. What on my example, what I after I discovered the three principles, and I had this very sudden outburst of just feeling quiet, feeling loved by me. But I think what I had a habit of searching for too long, and I wanted to keep it up. So I almost wanted to honor that path. It's just like, the principle of consistency. We want to continue something even if we have arrived. So
Yeah. Well, this consistency that you talk about brings a very interesting a level of understanding to the principles, because it is a discipline. I mean,
the
that's why,
remembrance.
yes, the remembrance, or rather not the remembrance, because what I have found is that we forget.
Yeah.
And then the remembrance happens by itself, right? You don't lose yourself voluntarily, and you don't find yourself back voluntarily. It's like if you're having a conversation with someone and you suddenly realize that you haven't listened to anything they have said in the last 30 seconds because you were thinking about, I don't know, errands you had to run. In order for you to realize that you were gone, you have to be back.
Yeah.
You see?
That's beautiful.
And so
Powerful.
the remembrance happens on its own. But at the same time, we start recognizing the signals of being gone, being lost. And it seems to me that a lot of times the rational mind is enamored with the reasons to get lost, and it wants to insist on remaining lost. You see? Just like when you realize that you haven't been listening to the other person, and then you have the urge to judge yourself and say, oh my God, I'm horrible that I was away, which again takes you away, right? And so for me, the remembrance, the discipline, we call ourselves practitioners, right? Because we're practicing. So for me, it is the discipline of, as soon as you see that your mind is going in the direction of trouble, of constriction, of judgment, as soon as you realize that, give up sooner, give up better, give up faster. Even if your mind thinks it's a good idea to pursue that direction, give up. Allow the system to bring you back. Allow the grace of the system to take you in its arms and have its way with you, to bring you back to you, to bring you back to truth. And so the discipline for me is in the letting go.
Mm.
You see what I mean?
That's profound. That actually brings me to a question about, so let's say we have this profound experiences and we realize that we are that which we seek and our feeling is guiding us. And I think for most people, because normally we have so much thought and so much negative thought, just getting a glimpse of that can be so like, wow, what is this, right? And then it's because of that contrast, perhaps, that encountering that state of mind feels so extremely invigorating, so surprising. And I think then once maybe there's some settling down happening and maybe that intensity of the feeling goes away. And I think what a lot of people might have a challenge with is then we compare this very kind of high feeling to, let's say, a negative thought and therefore a negative feeling that we may have. And then in contrast to that, that may feel more somewhat alarming. So would you say that after having these insights, like your sensitivity to your feelings has become different? I don't know if I've formulated, yeah?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And I would say absolutely. And not only the sensitivity, but the relevance of my feelings has gained enormous importance. I mean, when we recognize that our emotional system, our feelings, is the real-time feedback system that gives us information on how we are using our minds, on how we are using the power of thought, and whether it is aligned with what we really want and who we really are and our highest possibility or not. I mean, why wouldn't you want to absorb all that information?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you want to recognize its sacredness and allow yourself to be guided by that? And so it's the relationship with my feelings has changed completely. And I have become so deeply grateful for my feelings and what they do. You see, and you were talking about the search. We were talking about the search a few minutes ago, and you see, when we are searching for something, we have to recognize that the starting point is that we are lacking something. But when you really understand that the problem with lack is that you are creating it, and that any endeavor that begins with the creation of lack is impossible to accomplish, because the lack was created, so it cannot get fulfilled. It cannot get solved out there. It needs to be solved by being dissolved, you see? So it's the dissolving of the lack that brings you back to that sentiment, that level of peace that you were talking about. And it's funny because the more time you spend in that feeling of peace, the more colors and shades it seems to have. And so some of them can be, like you say, they can feel like you're very, very high, you know, very elated. And then others are just so ordinary, so calm, so, well, yeah, that's it. But at the same time, well, yeah, that's it. What else could there be? What could be possibly lacking?
Well, so when we get back to this home state, what do you think is it that either prevents us from staying here? And we are saying this being mindful of the fact that thoughts kind of are bound to change one way or the other. But would you say that there's such a thing as almost like being afraid of our innate happiness that we might experience because it's so weird?
Well, it's funny. I once heard a spiritual teacher say that the only reason why we get lost is because we so love the feeling of getting found again.
Oh, yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah, but it seems to me that it honestly seems to me like when we make being lost something to be feared, we lose the game already. We've missed the point already. Because getting lost is part of the human condition. It is the human condition, right? And I don't think we are looking for a divine state away from our humanity. I think
Yes.
we are here to experience the whole thing, the whole enchilada, like they say, right? And there is so much beauty in lostness as well. There is so much bliss at the same time in personal, right? Because then I get to fall in love and I get to experience loss and I get to. So yes, when we are looking at things from a greater perspective, there might be no I and there might be just the experience of loss and all that, but it doesn't seem to me at all like we have to escape the human dimension in any way. But we need to just learn to integrate the whole thing and really allow the whole system to guide us in our human dimension, in our human experience, not out of it, not through it, but in it, and really, really make the best of our time here.
Ooh, that's so profound. Like the thing that you just pointed to about, I use language somewhat differently, but I could just summarize it by, well, spiritual maturity or understanding isn't about staying high or staying positive. If anything, it's probably more about how much do we mind when we don't have that? How much can we remember that it's temporary and be able to enjoy even that? Because it's easy to enjoy the positive and the high. And that
Yeah,
seems to be something that you're pointing to.
absolutely. But also, so you see, when we talk about staying high, staying present, what I am talking about is bringing that presence into the ordinary, bringing that possibility of calmness, that state, that higher state, if you want to call it that, into the ordinary and realizing that it is here. It is
Yes.
not separate from the ordinary, day to day, breath to breath, human experience. Now, You mentioned us being afraid of happiness. I think we learn to fear happiness because, come on, you can't be happy. Something must be wrong with
Yeah.
you, right?
Yeah.
And not only something must be wrong with you, but it's almost shameful to be happy, to pronounce yourself happy. It's like, look at him. He's claiming that he's happy.
Yeah.
The audacity. Right? It's not polite to be happy. It generates envy and all sorts of things. And so we are advised early on not to be too happy because you can't get in trouble. And so we mistrust happiness. Everybody has heard some version of when we are happy, we we ruin our happiness by wondering how long it will last.
Yes.
Yes.
That's
Or
so true.
this is too good. Something bad must be on the way, right? And so let's prepare. While we are happy, let's prepare for the bad time. And oh my God, what a waste of time, right? What a waste of talent. What a waste of wisdom. What a waste of possibility. So it seems to me that by really bringing the sacredness down to the ordinary and realizing that there is nothing sacred, but everything is sacred, but there is
Yes.
nothing sacred. There is just the ordinary. So bringing those two realms together opens up a completely different game of possibilities for us in the here and now. Because you see, what good is presence up here in perfection if you I remember a conversation I had with a Buddhist monk many years ago, and I was saying in the monastery, and we were having a conversation around the difficulties of monastic life. He laughed and laughed and laughed and told me, monastic life is the easiest thing in the world. Go back and teach your family. That is difficult.
That's the hardest. Yeah.
Go back and teach your friends. That is difficult. Dare to live with the truth of what you have seen down in the ordinary world. And you will be laughed at, you will be ridiculed, you will be judged, you will be criticized. But dare to live the truth of what you have seen. That is true monastic life. You see, what he was pointing to was this possibility of really gutting the sacredness out of the ordinary.
Yeah, because we're conditioned to do the exact opposite. I think, like, even so many religion, culture, almost from an early age, we're taught this belief that whatever is sacred is somewhere else out there, or somehow you have to sit down and meditate for hours, or you have to do this and that, and maybe you'll get a little taste of it, but you're not God. You are just ordinary. You're not. You just. I don't know, and that's why you need to be humble. And I love how Sid Banks speaks about this. It says humility isn't thinking less about you. Humility is thinking about yourself less. It's striking. The simplicity of the three principles is so powerful. And also, as you said, I mean, I think almost everybody must have thought, well, this must be too simple to be true. But that's perhaps its biggest unique value proposition if you put it in marketing terms.
Yes. And at the same time, it's baffling. It's mind-boggling because you see that it is too simple. But at the same time, you witness the people that live with this understanding living such beautiful, simple, connected, present lives. And they smile and they say, yeah, it is that simple. And so it's like, you get so curious, like, really? Can it be that simple? Because I am seeing the results of it. I am seeing the testament of it. So it doesn't add up that something so simple could produce results that are so striking. And as you say, there's big marketing value there. Because it really points and it really sparks the curiosity, like, oh, what are they seeing that I am not seeing?
That's it. That's it. That's walking the talk. Even right now, as I'm listening to you, you're saying things, and I feel all kinds of different feelings coming up in me. And I think, like, let's say 5 years ago, I would be so inclined to go and try to analyze it or to play the devil's advocate. But it seems like your state of presence, your receptivity, however, I mean, of course, I think about it, so I have my own experience of it generated from the inside out, but that's the thing that makes me lean on to you. And I feel like that has been the story of Cindy Banks as well. Like, even originally he didn't formulate things like three principles, right? He was just a very ordinary man.
Yes, exactly. But you see, what I love about what we're discussing is that it strikes your curiosity, and that curiosity forces you into a state of mind of openness and receptivity.
Mm-hmm.
It forces you into a willingness to see more, a willingness to hear more. And you do, inevitably, you do, almost without noticing, just by remaining in that state, in that state of emptiness. You see? I was reading in a poem that the eyes must be the loneliest organ because they need to remain empty. And it had me wondering, and what I realized was that every one of our senses, their value is in that they remain empty. Right? Because if I saw something and then that image came with me and I wanted to see something else, it would be just a juxtaposition of images that would not let me see anything else. And so the value of our eyes, of our ears, it is in their ability to remain completely empty.
Yeah.
And when we allow ourselves to be in a state of curiosity, of openness, of listening, of hearing, of presence, we are emptying ourselves. And because we are emptying ourselves, new thought, fresh thought can come in.
Fantastic. That kind of explains why I named this Brand New Thought, but please continue.
So that to me points again to the perfection of the system. No, it is designed that so that it looks too simple, but you see the results and that gets you curious and keeps you open. And so you have to have new thought. You see how beautiful it is? So elegant, so clean. And then you must come to the conclusion at some point that it was that ability to empty yourself, to put yourself in a listening state, that got you to see more. And ultimately, that is what we are trying to point to. That is what Sidney Banks was trying to point to. In one of his books, he states that we are terribly confused about what thinking is. And that it would seem like thinking is regurgitating information, and again and again and again, going over what we already know. And he says that's not thinking. Thinking is the ability of being empty so that new thought can come in, so that new insight can happen. And it's counterintuitive to see that that is what can take us to our best possibility. Because in our society, we value knowledge so much. What we know gives us tremendous status. And the more you know, the more status you have, the more respected you are. And so, of course, what do you mean emptying yourself of knowledge? That doesn't make any sense. I don't want to give this up. Oh, but it is in there. It is in that. And giving what you have up that you get to cleanse, that you get to empty. And then you get to listen. You get to see something new. The word conversation means from versing one liquid into recipient. But it requires emptiness. You see, you cannot pour something into something that is not empty. And so conversation requires that we empty ourselves again and again and again, just so that we can see something else. And the nature of life is conversational. We are in constant conversation with everything, with each other, with ourselves, with nature, with pots and pans, and as we cook, and with everything. We are in constant conversation. But we have forgotten the art of emptying ourselves. And again, it's so simple.
Wow. It's funny for me, our conversation is almost like a direct manifestation of what you're saying. I'm listening to you. I've thought of a few questions that perhaps I wanted to ask. And, I'm noticing my mind at some point, like wandering to those questions. And there's like, well, wait a minute, this is pulling me. I can't do this. So your gracious presence is forcing me to empty myself. Wait, but this brings me to a question. Is there such a thing as a variable for getting into that state of emptiness and making sure we can have insights? And I asked this question to Christine Heath. She said, I don't know, but I can tell you what will make you not have this insight, which is trying to have an insight. It was like, well, yeah, that's fair. That makes sense. But nevertheless, I want to ask you that as well. Because if people can come across the concept of the three principles or hear some sort of a pointer, and for some people it's interesting, for some people it's like, what was this? And then for us individually as well, like our relationship to the truth of the three principles goes up and down. So what is that? Is that is making our level of receptivity go up and down?
Well, it's funny because it seems to be paradoxical, right? Because it is happening, it happens naturally, but you can also deliberately bring yourself to that state, or try to put yourself in that state. Deliberate willingness, if we want to call it that way. So for me,
deliberate willingness, I love that. Yes.
For me, it's a little bit like orgasms. So if you want to have an orgasm, you try to have an orgasm, that's
you block
not
it.
You get it. You see?
It's funny, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we were speaking about happiness and how we can't make it. There's this comedian called Tim Minchin. He has this very famous joke: is happiness is like an orgasm. If you think about it too hard, you push it away.
Exactly. And so insights are like orgasms. You cannot force them, but you have to orientate yourself in that direction, because otherwise it's not going to happen. You see? So it's that sweet spot between, okay, I am here, I am surrendered, I am willing, but I have to wait for the magic to happen, because I am in a collaboration with life. This is not just me. And that is where you see that there is a counterpart, that there is conversation, that there is collaboration. Because if I put myself in that state, Sydney Banks says, new thought must come. It surely will. Wisdom will. It must come. So the game seems to be look in that direction, remain here. Sooner or later, something will happen. When it needs to happen. It's just that our preferences are all over the place with this because we want it now. We want it this minute because this is what
Personal,
we
yeah.
need. And again, the beauty of the design showing us that there is so much more than what we know. And teaching us the possibility of resting in the unknown and resting in nothing happening and trusting that. The invitation to trust is always the invitation to surrender. Always the invitation to rest. And it seems to me that you either trust the system completely or you don't, because any degree of, well, I trust it 70%, 89%, then you don't really fully trust it. You see, and to the level to which you don't trust it is the level to which you create suffering for yourself because you can't rest. You see?
And so where does the trust, do you think the trust comes from having had that experience? For example, you used the word inevitable a few times. The inevitability of new thought is, do you think the trust comes from that experience, or is it almost like at will, or is like, as you said, deliberately surrendering to it?
Again, paradoxically, both.
Yeah.
Paradoxically, both, because trust is such an interesting word. It's a little bit like forgiveness. Who does forgiveness belong to? The person that gives it or the person that receives it?
There's so much misunderstanding about that. Oh, the person that gives it, because you're the one who's feeling the relief.
Right. And so trust, we use trust in so many ways, like I trust you means careful.
Yeah, I'm holding you accountable. Yeah.
Right. And I trust you, but I trust you because I decide to trust you or because you gain my trust. And if I decide to trust you, can you lose my trust or can I just pull it? So again, who does trust belong to? Most of my journey in the principles has had to do with trust. It has been a long learning to trust and to surrender and to take my hands off the wheel. But we understand trust as it is so full of future and preference. We trust that there will be light after darkness, the light at the end of a tunnel. We trust that there will be calm after the storm. You see the preference? You see the future? Trust cannot happen in the future. Nothing can happen in the future. Trust needs to happen now. And so can we trust the darkness? Can we trust the storm? Not because of what it might bring. No, because if it is here, it's meant to be happening now. And this is perfection. So
that's beautiful.
Understanding that what the storm does in us, light cannot do in us. Calmness cannot do in us. And so surrendering to what is being in the moment, regardless of what is being in the moment, that is trust. That is surrendering. And it needs to be deliberate. Otherwise, it's not surrendering, you see? I was talking yesterday to a friend, and we were discussing the holy scriptures of Christianity from the point of view of the principles. And we were talking precisely about this. Does it need to be deliberate? And we were looking at Jesus right before his passion and how he goes up to the mountain and asks God, if you can take this callous away from me. And it is the only time that he does not receive a direct answer, but there is just silence. And to me, that silence is, this is voluntary. I'm not forcing it upon you. You surrender yourself. So again, bringing that down to the absolute ordinary. I surrender what I know for what I don't know. I empty myself of what I know in exchange for what I don't know. I surrender my ego for eternal life. I am the lamb. Do you see? I sacrifice my preference. I sacrifice myself. I sacrifice what I believe. I sacrifice my mental structure, my structure of thought in exchange for a new side.
Fresh thought, emptiness, whatever you want to call it.
Fresh thought. But it is voluntary. We won't be forced by life. We are so loved that we are trusted even to choose
the opposite of that. Yes.
Exactly. Does that make sense?
It makes so much sense, and it touched me profoundly. And I know you have another meeting coming up soon. So I'm curious if you can do a small, quick improvisation. If I could throw some words to you. I don't know if these words are part of your paradigm or how much your clients bring it up, but I just want to hear a quick reaction, maybe a word or two, but feel free to talk about it more or less. Yeah?
Sure.
Okay, beautiful. Productivity. What's productivity for Marina Galan?
Following inspiration.
Forgiveness.
A shift in a state of consciousness that allows us to see innocence.
Success.
Rest.
Communication.
Inevitable.
Relationship.
Growth.
Religion.
Possibility.
Spirituality.
Encounter with truth.
How about parenting?
The feeling behind it is so beautiful. So beautiful. It's difficult to express, but it's the ultimate surrendering.
That's so beautiful. Thank you so much for that. Maybe one more last question. I'm not ready to let go of you yet. But just to put a little bit of a context, a lot of my listeners are from Armenia, although they're from all over the world, and you're very sensitive to everything that's happening around the world. I've noticed that. You write about it, you speak about it. We went through a war a few years ago. What's happening in Ukraine right now? The world is a mess. Given all of this, what's giving hope to Marina Galan these days?
Can I be raw, honest?
Please.
To me, the bringing together of the world in higher states of consciousness is inevitable. Because when I consider that we are being guided, that everything is being guided, I have to ask myself, guided towards what? What is wisdom up to? And when it's so simple to see that when human beings listen to wisdom and allow themselves to be guided by it, they rise up to their highest possibility, which includes the greater good that takes everything into consideration, not only human beings, but everything. When the roots of a tree allow themselves to be guided, when any manifestation of life. So if we are being guided towards our highest possibility, the bringing together of humanity in a higher state of consciousness, for me, is absolutely inevitable. I don't know when, where, how. That's not for me to know. But I know that by allowing myself to be guided from within, I am contributing to that in the best possible way I can. And that is hope.
That's so beautiful. And maybe the last question, because I know you also have a podcast and you share the 3 principles in the Spanish-speaking community. If you were in my shoes, if you could ask you any question that I didn't ask, what would that be?
I really enjoy asking people about funny things that have happened in their lives.
Please share one.
Okay. So one day, years ago, I woke up with the thought, my dad is too old to change. And it was absolute truth. Yes. And so because there was that truth, it was like, what? Well, you have 2 choices. You either keep insisting on changing him, or you get to know the dad you do have. And it was so obvious to me that I needed to spend the rest of the time that I had with him, getting to know him. And my relationship with him changed completely. And it was a beautiful, amazing experience. But a few years later, I was in conversation with someone and I was telling them this story, and they asked me, what about your mom? And my answer, it came from the heart. It was like, no, she's still young. She still can change. Oh man. And in that moment, I realized what I was doing, and I had to surrender. I had to surrender. It was so obvious. But that was a funny moment with this understanding. Absolutely. That's just the first one I thought of.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so very much for taking time to speak with me. I feel touched. This is one of the conversations that I will have to re-listen many times, although I re-listen to almost all the interviews I conduct. But I've been meaning to get to speak with you for a long time, and I just feel very grateful.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Thank you. I've enjoyed this enormously. We should do it again.
Absolutely.
We should do it again. Thank you. And I'll be seeing you around.
Yes. And thank you guys for listening.